Okay, we're going to go ahead and jump into this morning's algorithms for week 2, day 4. Let's go ahead and launch that. Okay, so we know that arrays are non-primitive data types. That means they can contain more than just strings and numbers combined together. They can also contain other arrays. Now, the arrays that we're going to be looking at now are called nested arrays. These nested arrays contain arrays within arrays. So, array of arrays. Okay, arrays are capable of having arrays inside them, assuming we're given an array like this. We're just indenting at every line. This is a nicely even nested array because it's 3 arrays and they're all having 3 integers which is within each array. So if we look here and we look at all the numbers, the first array is 258, second is 361, the last is 577. So if we wanted to log this one in particular, this 8, what we would have to do is target the first array that the 8 lives in. So then we would say R2D at 0, because 0 is the position of the first array. Okay, you see how there's multiple arrays. The first array is at position 0. Then within the first array, it has, within this first item, it's an array itself. So we can access the items in here. And specifically, we want to reach this 8 because 0 is at, 2 is at position 0, 1 is at 5, and 2 is 8. So if we say R2D at 0, 2, we will get the value 8 there. Okay, let's see how well we're understanding this. So how well do we get this concept? It's just locating the outer array, and then you go into the inner indices here. So R2D, first thing we look for is its row value, 0. And then we look for its column value. Columns here are evenly spaced out, so this is the column at position 2. All right, now we see here, could we determine if a certain value was present inside this array of arrays? How would we loop through an array of arrays? All right, so let's create a function. We have a function here called is present in 2D, and we receive this array, R2D, this array of arrays, and then we receive a value that we'll be searching for inside of there, inside this R2D array. That returns, and this function is going to return if the value is present, and it's going to also return false if otherwise. So think about, how would we loop through this? What if this R2D array wasn't even? What if it was jagged? Like, what if the first one was 4 long, the second one was only 2 long, and the third one was like 5 long? Okay, how would we loop through that array at every single different inner array length? Okay, don't assume that the arrays will always have the same size. You must rely on its dot length. So don't use a number to say if the array is less than this certain number that we think is an even number for all the arrays, we have to rely on its dot length. Okay, so here's the hint. Can we put a for loop inside another for loop? Remember when we did this in programming basics, when we had for loops inside for loops and how we would have to T-diagram only when we finish the inner for loop, can we go back to the outer for loop? Okay, so this is going to be the first challenge. We're going to create a function that is going to test whether the value is inside the array of arrays. Okay, if it's true, we're going to say it is present, and if it's not there, then we're going to say return false. Okay, the next challenge here and the last challenge here is to flatten a 2D array. So what that means is you're given a two-dimensional array, an array of arrays. Return a new array containing just the values from the inside subarrays. So if you get an array like this, an array of 2, 5, 8, and then the next array is 3, 6, 1, the next one is 5, 7, 7. What I expect to receive back is a single array of 2, 5, 8, 3, 6, 1, 5, 7, 7, not separated by inner arrays, but just one giant array. So we're flattening a 2D array. Okay, and again, we don't want to assume that it's going to be a nice even square. It may be jagged, so you want to rely on array.length. Also, when we do this, we don't want to use built-in JavaScript methods. This will flatten it. This will do it for you. Okay, but we don't want to use this. We want to figure out how the people that made this made it work. So we're going to do this ourselves so that we can be better programmers and then understand how functions are made, like especially these inbuilt functions. Okay, we can use .push and pop though. That's fine. We can do that. So here we are. We have a function template. We have this variable flat, which contains an empty array. Your code will go here, and then you return that flattened array, this one that you've created. So I think this is a pretty fair challenge. It shouldn't be too out there. Does anyone have any questions about what we're doing? Okay, let's go ahead and break out into groups then. I'll go ahead and do that now. Okay, welcome back, everyone. Let's go ahead and present our answers. Who would like to present for the first question? This one is within a nested array, given the value, we want to determine if it's present in the 2D array, whatever value we're given. So who has the answers for me? Come on, somebody's got to have it. Dan and Mike, come on. Let's get an answer.
All right, I'll get the first one then. All right, can y'all see?
Yes.
All right. So the idea is we need to see if a value is present somewhere in the array. And let's say we just set the number of 7, and we can see that is in there. So we want to have two nested arrays, or a nested array of 2. And first we're going to go through I is 0, and we're going to check every spot in the first array by setting up a second loop. Say, okay, array first index 0, then we're going to go 0, 1, 2 for however long that index is. And then we're going to check whatever that index is. So at this point, 0, 0, then 0, 1, then 0, 2, compared to the value that we're passing in, which is 7. And if any of it is equal, then it's going to return true. It'll break out of the whole function, and it'll just return true, saying, hey, it's in there. And if it never does, it's going to finish through that loop for that row, finish up the loop for all 3 columns, and then just return false at the very end.
I think you meant for that column and then the row, because the outer loop checks the row, the inner loop checks the columns.
Yes, sorry, I got it backwards.
Right, so the outer loop checks the row, the inner loop checks the columns.
Mhm.
So does anyone have any questions about how this works? Let me just emphasize it again. This outer loop checks this row, then this row. When you create a for loop inside a for loop to check a nested array, the inner one here is checking the values in the rows at the column position. Okay, does anyone have any questions about how this works? So we just have an if statement within the inner for loop that says, if at R2D at I at J, which is the 2 index positions here. So we say, if at row and column, we get this value, just return true. Otherwise, at the very end of everything, you're going to return false. Okay, good job, guys. All right, who'd like to present for number 2?
I'll go.
Okay, Joan.
All right. All right, so here we had a for loop inside a for loop. So the first for loop on line 137 here checks the index for the first set of arrays.
Well, hold on. Sorry, Joan. Let's just remind each other here what the problem is. This one is flatten array. So we're taking an array of arrays, like we see here on their var result. We're taking that array of arrays and we're making it one singular array. So we get the result 2, 5, 8, 3, 6, 1, 5, 7, 7. Okay, sorry. Go ahead now. Start over.
No problem. Yeah. So the first for loop checks the outer sets of array, and then the second for loop checks the inner values for each array. So what we have here is we set up a variable y beginning at 0 and ending at the length of the array. And then we also have another variable count, which is 0, and ends at the value, the length of the array as well. So what we did here is we pushed into the flat array here, array 2D index y, and also index count. So it checks the outer array and then the inner array and then pushes that value into the flat. So it keeps doing that until it's out of indices to run, and then it returns the value, as you see down here.
Great job. That's it. So the only difference now, well, not the only difference, but the main difference now is that within the second for loop, we are now just pushing to this flat variable, this empty array. The empty array holds all our values. Now we're just pushing, as we read through the array of arrays, every value that we read, we push it to that flat array. That flat array is not a nested array. It'll be just a regular one. So as we're reading through that nested array, we're pushing to this flat array. And then we just return that at the end, return flat, return what we've pushed to all along. Okay, and that concludes the answer. Does anyone have any questions about how to do this one? Pretty sure we all got this solution. Okay, all right, so then that ends this morning's algorithm session. Go ahead and stop the recording.